September to Ruth Lasky and Josh Voigt, and luckily we'll be doing it now every year. I'm so pleased to be here, hosted by The Lab, thank you very much, for our annual Art and Dialogue program. So Art and Dialogue is in response to artists' requests to have more contact with curators, to our national network of curators. So we fly in a curator, this time Peter Eleey, which I'll let Dina introduce, to meet with past Arcadia awardees and then present a public program. So it's a platform for the curator and also a chance for artists to reconnect with curators outside of their home base. So with that, I'm going to make another announcement, which is that we are excited to be part of the inaugural edition of Untitled in San Francisco, which is launching in January. We will be co-hosting the vernissage on January 12th, and I hope you will all come. It will be a celebration of Arcadia artists and really art in San Francisco. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dina, the Executive Director of The Lab. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lexi. It's cool that we get to do this. We rarely do didactic programs at The Lab. I have PTSD from working in a museum for too long. So it's really fun to have someone else organize it and put it all together, and you get to do the PowerPoint presentation, so yay. I'm Dina Beard, I'm the director of The Lab, also the janitor. I have been working here for 2 years, and we just launched our residency program. I don't know if anyone had a chance to see Jackie Gordon's residency last month, but it was quite a joy to see that project evolve. We basically give 3 artists a living wage throughout the year, so it's between $25,000 and $70,000. Keys to our space and total control over our operations. So it's quite an experiment, and it's been fun to see that happen. Our next artist in residence is going to be Dora Garcia. She's coming out from Spain. So with that, I'd like to introduce Peter Eleey. Peter Eleey is currently now the shorter title of Chief Curator at MoMA PS1. Since joining MoMA PS1 as its curator in 2010, Eleey has organized 20 exhibitions, probably more than that, at the museum, focusing on artists Mark Leckey, Ed Atkins, Maria Lesnig, Darren Botter, Matt Connors, as well as acclaimed surveys of Huma Baba, James Lee Byers, Laura Favaretto, and our own George Kushar. From 2007 to 2010, Eleey was curator at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, where he organized exhibitions with Trisha Brown and Gashka Mishuga. Before joining the Walker, he was a curator and producer at Creative Time New York from 2002 to 2007, where he organized a wide range of multidisciplinary projects and events. So with that, please join me in welcoming Peter Eleey.
Thanks, Dina, and also Lexi and Carol Marino from Arcadia who invited me out here, and to all of you for coming, and if you're willing to sit in the front row. Usually when I talk, I realize I often talk about group shows that I do, because I always feel like when you give a talk, it's important to to put something of yourself out there that makes you vulnerable in some way to the audience. And so I feel most vulnerable when I make group shows. Because if I do a solo show, if it's a great show, it's never totally me because it's someone else's work. If it's a bad show, it's never totally my fault. But with a group show, it's much more me on the line and somewhere my thinking on the line. So I usually do these talks about those projects, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm actually going to talk about solo shows that I've done, and I'm going to start actually with the solo show that I did with my colleague Stuart Comer that just opened, I guess, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago? Yeah, 2 weeks ago at PS1, which is an exhibition of an artist named Mark Leckey, who had actually once lived in San Francisco, British artist, actually born in Liverpool. And it's very funny. I suppose if I was a collector and I bought a lot of art, once in a while I would look at that art and realize, like, oh, you would learn something, right? Always imagine collectors learn something about themselves through all the stuff that they have. And in a way, I have the same experience curating a group show because I think it's about something, and I put it together, and then near the end of the process, I realize it's actually about something else, which is a really great experience. And I had some version of that after Mark's show opened. I understood something else, or started thinking about something else in a self-diagnostic kind of way. And in part, it started with this conversation that Stuart and I did with him at the opening. And then the day after the opening, this article came out in the New York Times, and I just want to read the end of it. Well, Mr. Eleey is often referred to as a video artist. His work defies easy categorization, as the MoMA PS1 show attests. Over here is a sculptural minotaur head. There, videos of his mock pedagogical speeches. Elsewhere, a shiny chrome snare drum. Even Mr. Eleey declined to say how he would describe himself. I don't like to, he said. I've tried my best to not be known. That's the end of the article. And I think it's not what he said, it's actually more what the writer wrote before that. Even Mr. Eleey declined to say how he would describe himself, as if somehow artists are always in the position of describing themselves well, or even wanting to. And that was interesting because it connected to me with a lot of things I'd been thinking about while I was working with him on the show, that tied back to other shows that I've done that in some way are also connected to that desire not to be known. I don't think he means not to have his work understood. I think he means not to be summarized in some way and available. And that is an interesting thing as a curator working with an artist on a survey show, is this exercise of a very ambivalent exercise, in my experience, for an artist to kind of look back at things they've made that they have probably different feelings about now, and also the exercise of having some summary experience or presentation of what they made. And for whatever reason, I've been continue to be drawn to artists who, in many cases, haven't had these shows, which is often what we're trying to do at museums is show you stuff that you haven't seen and give people a platform that they haven't had. But more selfishly, I'm realizing I'm drawn to those people who haven't had those shows, in part because they define easy categorization or summary as a condition of their work. They would never say it as explicitly as Mark did, but so someone else, I guess, that I was thinking about in this context is Mike Kelly. I actually didn't start that show. That show had life well before me. It began at the Stedelijk in Amsterdam. But I installed it and expanded it, and it came to PS1 and spent a lot of time fairly deeply in that work, albeit without Mike, because he had died by the time the show came to us, which was its own kind of strange exercise. But one of his earliest pieces, which he made in his graduate show, was a series of birdhouses. And one of them was this great birdhouse with the big hole that's the easy road, and the smaller one that's the hard road. And I think there's something about artists who choose to, or I guess my point is they don't choose to, who can only make art or sort of be artists as people who are constantly changing or complicating their own, in many cases, their own biographies, sort of working in pseudo-autobiography at times to make it even harder. I think that's the hard road, and it's why many of them, I think, fall outside of art history. We're always trying to know an artist, right? When we go to see a show, when we make a show, and this idea of an outlaw that we're trying to capture is always an idea I've liked. And this is actually something I saw on my street corner in the East Village. This was 2 years ago when I did actually the first survey of in the U.S. of Sturtevant's work, American artist, Midwestern artist who had lived in Paris for many years, who passed away unfortunately before the show opened, but had made these wanted posters actually of herself based on a wanted poster that Marcel Duchamp had made years before, that sort of a jokey one, under the name Hook, Line, and Sinker, also known under the name Rose Célibat, which was his alter ego. I mean, Duchamp is kind of a great proto-figure for this identity displacement and confusion and resistance that I'm thinking of. And Sturtevant did her own version of that, swapping her own mugshot in for his. And her work was misconstrued for a long time, still is, as someone whose work consists of making copies of other artists' work, which is not what she does. It's always her work. But she's essentially an artist who camouflaged herself to a great degree inside the art of others. So she was relatively invisible for most of her career. Not that she only made that kind of work, but she certainly made it hard for people. This is her doing a version of this Duchamp self-portrait that he had done years before with soap lather, kind of styling himself as a satyr in some way. This is an example of one of the first works that she made based on the work of another artist. She borrowed a flower silk screen from Andy Warhol and proceeded to make her own Warhols with his screen, which of course he wasn't printing himself anyway. And that explosively begged all these questions about authorship or reproduction, because Warhol's image wasn't his to begin with. It was actually a woman photographer's that he had altered slightly. There was a lot that the work brought up. I mean, this is a view from her first solo show at the Bianchini Gallery in New York. She was 40 when she had her first solo show. And in the show, she lined the walls with these Warhol flowers, which she had made. And in the show, there was this rather amazing piece of what looks like a George Segal sculpture, pulling a garment rack down the street. And on the garment rack, like Yesterday's Fashions, are hanging her versions of other artists' work, like Frank Stella. You can see a Jasper Johns flag there. There's an Oldenburg shirt that's hanging on the rack. And what's funny is that among other things, is that the George Segal itself, there is no George Segal that looks like that. That's just a kind of George Segal that was actually cast over the body of a dancer named Steve Paxton, who's a friend of hers. But this idea of sort of the grid against which you measure yourself and disappear kind of into the background, in her work also recurs in reference to Edward Muybridge, a much older photographer who artists were, for a period, obsessed by in the 1960s. And this is a photo against a great backdrop, very scientific backdrop of a woman carrying a heavy water up and down stairs and going through the paces. And Sturtevant did that herself, but naked. So the woman who's largely invisible in her art suddenly becomes very visible in front of her Warhols, totally naked and kind of, in a way, measuring herself against that backdrop of something that appears to be what it isn't. She does it in a series of other photographs that she takes of herself, again, kind of measuring her progress, as it were, through the frame against her version of the Rosenquist, another Jasper Johns, and a Lichtenstein. When I was working on the show, and unfortunately she died before I could ask her about this, her second solo show was a show in Paris, a place called Gallery J in 1966, and the top image is the image, the one image that survives, or seems to survive from the show. As I should point out, the Bianchini Gallery one is the only one that survives from that show. There's no checklist or anything. And that's in part because she really controlled how those works were, how those exhibitions were publicized and consequently historicized. And so, all we know is this image of, again, a George Siegel type figure, potentially an art dealer, who knows, seeming to consider a Tom Wesselmann that she had made. There's this Lichtenstein Crying Girl, which he only ever made as a print, which she has blown up, altered slightly, and this painting is now sitting on the floor sideways. You can see there's also Rosenquist spaghetti painting. That's not the whole painting, but that's what we thought it was for a long time. And an Oldenburg hamburger sitting on the floor. And the gallery was closed. You only saw it through the glass from the street. But a couple months before the show, just as we were about to put the catalog to bed, I came across the two black and white photos on the bottom, which show us, actually now that the Rosenquist spaghetti actually has two parts. So the lower part that has a bit of grass. And you can now see that the Lichtenstein, the bottom right image, the Lichtenstein has moved up onto the sort of hanging in the window. And on the left, you can see there was also a Stella sitting on the floor, which then moves into the other room, sort of sitting on the back wall on the right. And in fact, in this almost kind of coffin-like crate sitting on the floor is in fact a version of Jasper Johns' double flag. And I don't know what is on that little pedestal by the door. But I think what this suddenly suggested was that maybe this show actually had no fixed form. Maybe it changed every day, I don't know. But I don't think that these are images of the show being installed. I think these are images that were taken of the show over the run of the exhibition. The idea that this was actually never a show that was hung, as it were, makes sense to me when in fact the image is of someone seeming to hang an exhibition with works just leaning up against the walls. It makes sense that it would always be in action. After all, in the Bianchini show, the paintings were on wheels, going somewhere. And in the Muybridge pictures, they're still pictures of someone going somewhere, doing something. Rather bizarrely, she, in 1967, does I think, totally remarkable and still very confusing work where she did an Yvonne Rainer dance called 3 Seascapes that she taught herself. And these are images that survive of that performance. What does it mean to dance a dance that doesn't traffic in any way in notions of originality? There's absolutely no meaning, right? You're not copying anything because there's nothing to copy. You are only doing it. It's one of the only works by a woman artist that she does over the course of her career, which I also think is interesting and peculiar. Performance was a key part of her work, because in some sense all of her works were enacting something, and she always talked about it as action. Interestingly, she did a series of films, performances on film that Virginia Dwan produced, in which she enacted various Joseph Beuys actions, and she exhibited works that she made, of Joseph Beuys that she made in New York City before Joseph Beuys had exhibited his work in New York City. So the very first Beuys works that New Yorkers saw, the very first solo show of Joseph Beuys, was in fact a Sturdivant show of Joseph Beuys. In the last 10 years of her life, she returned to Warhol, who she worked with pretty much every decade. And she was alive, and she made another Marilyn, but this time one that he had never made, a black-on-black Marilyn, which I have to think is also a kind of image of disappearance of the female icon who vanishes somehow into the void. She printed it with a glossy black paint against a matte lighter black background. So in the right light, she does something else. And when I installed the show at MoMA, I also took some works on paper that she had made and installed them in our data gallery with some Marcel Duchamp works we have in the collection. And so what you see in this image is the bicycle wheel and the snow shovel. And there's a little thing on the wall beside that, which is this photograph of a coat rack, which was a Duchamp piece that she made her own, photographed it as he photographed it, and then overpainted it with gouache as he had done, and sort of masking the reproduced image. This is one of Duchamp's great fresh widows, and beside it I installed a series of three from a series of watercolor on mimeograph works that she had made of these roto-relief things that Duchamp had made. I think I like the idea of her disappearing somehow back into that landscape. Around the same time, I was working on a show with an Austrian artist who also had never had a major show, a full retrospective in the U.S. Named Maria Lasting. And Maria, in a way, sort of comes at this from almost the opposite angle. Her work for more than 70 years of her career consisted more or less of self-portraits. I think almost everything she made was a self-portrait, even when it wasn't in its immediate subject. Excuse me. And she described what she did most famously as body awareness painting. She was painting essentially the collision between how she imagined the world saw her from the outside with how she felt on the inside of her body. And over 70 years, you sort of see this existential struggle, kind of in isolation, of which all artists have in the studio, making their work by themselves. Even when they're not always working in the studio by themselves, it's having once pretended to be an artist for a little while. It's a very, it's an isolated experience. I think that's part of what makes it so special. But this is a painting that Maria did right after art school during World War II under Hitler, and when the Russians invaded from the east, she fled back to the south, and this painting, very sort of Kokoschka-esque in its expression, was exactly the kind of work that Hitler had outlawed as degenerate, that sort of expressivity suddenly erupts in this remarkable self-portrait. And then, it goes in a more abstract direction for a while. This is kind of head, in Formel style. She then makes these other, more recognizably figurative or head-like kind of totem paintings, almost kind of Nicolas de Stahl with these palette knife sorts of applications. I don't have a great image of this. This is an incredible painting. This is a self-portrait as a monster. This idea of yourself as this monstrous, somehow monstrous to others, or maybe monstrous to herself. I don't know. This is a self-portrait as a prophet. In many cases, the body isn't whole because, as she explained to me, she didn't feel that part of her body she painted. So if she was sitting down, she might paint the part of her body that was touching the chair. One of my favorite paintings of all time, self-portrait or plastic. I don't know. You could say a lot about this picture. Transparent, suffocating, making yourself visible, choking yourself. It just, somehow that cuts at the heart of what I'm trying to talk about, this, what it means to be visible in that as an artist, and the desire to conceal that in some way, while also still, trying to put some conflicting parts of yourself out there. This is a painting translation of the title is something like I bear the burden, or I bear the responsibility, or something. Carrying some maybe version of herself on her shoulders. Incredible painting now in our collection called Transparent Self-Portrait, where she explained to me she was watching a lot of television in the 1980s. This is from 1987, and her brushwork mimics in some ways the horizontal, static of the broadcast signal. This idea of sort of sending a signal out, something I also like. And she always looks kind of, I don't know what she's looking at, or almost saying something, but not really saying something. When I was, finishing, I sort of finished the show as much as I could finish it until the work showed up. And I sent her the floor plan, and she told her assistant to call Peter and tell him to cancel the show immediately, which I knew was probably going to happen. We knew was probably going to happen because that had happened many times before, and we didn't. So a few days later, she spent some more time with the floor plan and looked at it, and she said something about the show it's like a candy store, a sweet shop or something, which I thought, I don't speak German, but somehow a sweet shop, it was a way of kind of denigrating, I think, the selection of work as too easy somehow, but to me, I didn't see how it could be an easy show. One of the works I included was this work called The Illusion of the Missed Marriages, where she's holding a spectral version of herself from some earlier life fantasy image of herself over her head, like that burden painting in some way. I installed it next to another work that's somehow, she's almost like pulling this stillborn child out of herself. That's also a kind of illusion of the children she never had. I didn't think it was an easy show at all, because I don't think the work is easy in the slightest. This is another work, which I think is just incredible piece called Science. Science. This, like, studying something or investigating it. I mean, it's bizarrely kind of faceless, or not faceless, but eyeless, which I think is kind of interesting. Like, she's not looking at you, which must mean she's just focused on how she feels in some way, or looking inwards, I don't know. But these lines coming out from her are both, she described to me, like nerve lines of energy, but they also read to me as kind of this Frankensteinian, the monster again, like hooked up and being studied and registered in some way. These are mostly chronological, what I'm showing you, not totally. This is called Two Ways of Being. Whoa. The same look on the right. Remarkably similar to that first, very early self-portrait I showed you. And then this monstrous, vaginal, flayed, throat-like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that way of being is, but for that matter, I don't know what the way of being is on the right. But this idea of representing, two ways, this binary of the inside and the outside, how others perceive her, how she perceives and feels herself, that those can be juxtaposed as two figures in the same picture. There's also this. It's called Near You. She's in her 80s. She makes this 80s, late 70s. There is, the line in some ways in her painting is evocative of Alice Neal in a lot of ways, but it's funny. I mean, Alice Neal really is kind of like drawing, and she's working her way into the subject, and Maria is building herself sort of out in successive layers towards us. So it's one of these sort of strange, pseudomorphic, like two things that appear similar and are doing, or sort of arriving at these endpoints from totally opposite places. And then this painting, which was the last painting, chronologically the last painting I had in the show, which is called Painted by Death, just to keep with the ease, I guess, or the sweetness of the show. And indeed, she died a couple months after the exhibition opened, although lived long enough to read the press, which was great. And she lived in New York from 1968 to 1980, and gotten very little attention. So there was a kind of, I think, felt nice to be able to do that for her. This is one of my favorite Maria shows, which was also kind of right next to that other painting, which is Self-Portrait in the Snow. I don't know, I love the contorted figure. Again, the isolation in this cold landscape, and in the very distant left of the painting, you can sort of see that's the city, I guess, where the rest of us are. And that she's just kind of, out there alone with all this kind of toxic yellow and pink and green, and it's a lot happening. I don't know, amazing, incredible painting, I think. I could live with that forever. Another isolated, the artist alone in the landscape. This is James Lee Byers. Also never had a major show in the U.S., major survey in the U.S., except here in San Francisco, actually at the Berkeley Art Museum. Although, interestingly, there it all basically got jammed together in one arena. He just arranged it all. It was kind of incredible in this one, this one gilded circle. floor. It wasn't, hanging. There was no chronology to what you were looking at. This is a photo that Byers had taken of himself so that he could make this work, which he called autobiography. It was a film, is a film, that just loops. Pretty much nothing happens. And then for one frame, this appears. So if you're watching, you see this sort of flicker. Byers' version of navigating this ambivalent relationship to the public, let's say, or to himself, was the opposite of Maria's. It was actually to seek out the smallest and most invisible forms often, and to costume himself differently. This is a work he made in Japan. He lived in Japan at the start of his career. It's a couple pieces of wood lying on the floor, and the head is a little ball of bread. He's painted black. And he has an interesting relationship with the Museum of Modern Art. He, in 1964, offered the museum a couple of early works, paperworks, all the paperworks he made in Japan. After returning home to renew his visa, he was from Detroit, and I think Cranbrook, he saw a Mark Rothko painting, and this was in the early 60s, and he got on a bus to New York City, and he walked in the museum with a bunch of drawings, ink drawings, a little kind of classically Japanese, and some guys walked right up to the guard desk and said, "Hello, I'm here to see Mark Rothko." And at that point, instead of calling security, they called curatorial, and a woman named Dorothy Miller answered the phone. And a great legendary curator, and when we came down to see this, whoever this artist was, would call thinking, or even shown up, and he could see Mark Rothko. And he seduced her somehow into letting him exhibit some of the works he had brought in a stairwell at the museum, although I've never been able to verify which one, or a fire escape or something. And she invited her friends, and people bought some of those works, including Philip Johnson. And those early works have since made their way into collections, which is kind of interesting. And Dorothy helped him meet other people in the art world. And so in gratitude, he offered some works to the museum, but he was very particular about the conditions under which it would be accepted. So it says, and this is to Alfred Barr, the legendary founder of the Museum of Modern Art, who by then had become curator of the collection, more or less, having been relieved of his directorship. And a young man who's lived in Japan and has been in New York for several weeks called me to say he was now leaving New York, collected donating to the museum one of his works. He said he wanted the gift to be anonymous and his name to be suppressed, also as an artist of the work. In other words, a work by no one, given by no one. Which I kind of like, or given by someone who we don't know. She goes on to describe it, and anyway, and that work, in fact, is in the collection. There's a memo also in our archives, which I like. Dear Miss Miller, I regret the delay. The, all one word, Messer Gug Moma Miller Propos show failed. The reference there is to Tom Messer, who was the director of the Guggenheim at that point. I tried to have my work taken in by white tie and tails, sorry. I then settled for an elegant white-bearded rabbi for the mission, sorry again. So now maybe just a simple abstract person will leave the work at 21 for you. I hope it may be welcome, if so please list it only as unknown. Fortune comes mysteriously. I am free to go back to the Orient. I fly tomorrow at noon. Several miracles have come. At the Carnegie Institute Parthenon, he'd actually been invited to participate in the next Carnegie International. Having been encountered actually by the director of the Carnegie while he was performing bizarrely in Central Park. Unknown, noon, November 6th, a Benedictine nun quietly performed one of my works. This was Carnegie. It was by accident or surprise that I went there. My appreciation to you as ever for your delicate sensibilities. May winter bring new joys. Fondly, J.B. This is another kind of autobiography, self-portrait in the form of a hand-blown glass. It's about my height. This pedestal kind of right at sort of gut level is this, on this gilded pedestal is a little gilded ball. He often would conscript his dealers or curators in making the smallest gold spheres that jewelers could construct. So you would have to go out and sort of find some jeweler to make the tiniest little thing, and then buyers would come and drop it on the floor in the corner, turn the lights out, and that was the show. And that was a kind of appearance of him or his spirit. He did a piece also called The Ghost of James Lee Byers Calling. Lots of evasions. This is another work. It's another self-portrait in these sort of three zones of gilded paper mounted directly on the wall. Another one of the things he did in the 60s were these garments that were meant to be worn by multiple people. And unlike others who were doing this work independently in different parts of the world around the same time, Franz Erhard Walter in Europe, Ligia Pape in Brazil, he wasn't so interested in making a communal space in some way or a social space with these shared garments. He was actually interested in getting rid of the notion of singularity. There's somewhere actually in the Berkeley archive, which is the best archive of Byers' work, there's a letter where he says, if we're four people wearing a pair of pants, are we one person or are we four? I think it's kind of nice. It fits with, again, that kind of question of singularity or uniformity or summary. I found this in the archive. I don't know when it's from, but this hiding behind a shedding skin, I think is somehow right. He camouflaged himself much of the time that he appeared in public. He spoke with a kind of exaggerated, almost pretentious accent. Here he is in the picture, appropriately masked. Here he is actually about to distribute some pieces of printed ephemera down on the crowd outside of MoMA. He's standing on the roof of a townhouse in pink suit, pink hat. Here he is outside the Met for a performance called Byers Invisibly at the Met, wearing red platforms. I don't know what this is, a flag or some kind of shroud that he's semi-visible through. He does something similar in Burn, again, sort of half concealing himself in this red gauze. This is in Venice, in light or pink, I can't tell. This is a piece called The Perfect Epitaph that he rolled around Amsterdam. He's wearing a gold suit in this case and a black hat, which was also a costume that he enjoyed. Here he is at Documenta, standing in the pediment of the Federicianum, this time in white with his, rather appropriately, his back to us. Here he is actually in San Francisco doing a performance in a magazine's office, lying on the floor. And a gold suit also with a kind of gold, I don't know what you would call that. It's not exactly a garment, and his face is blindfolded, and he has this hat on. This was one of the first. This was actually the first show that Marion Goodman did when she became a dealer in New York, which was Belgian artist Marcel Grotars and James Lee Byers together, and here he is doing the first totally interrogative philosophy, as he called it, in all black camouflage. This is what his art often looks like, or sometimes looks like. Very beautiful objects, not only invisible ones that are concerned very much with a notion of perfection. This is called the table for perfect. And I think that perfection was also a kind of foil for this idea of summary that he was resisting. This is a view from the show at PS1, which included one of his gold suits, sort of Elvis-like in his own way, is this Midwesterner. And that gold suit also then reminded me of Mike Kelly's Banana Man costume in this other way that he was styling himself as in an early performance and series of works. This great two-part felt collage banner work called Animal Self, I think, / Friend of the Animals. I don't know what it is. But again, this kind of multiple versions of oneself, totemically inscribed within this universe of apparent sameness, the symmetrical reflections and difference. This is a work I think called Identity Crisis, if I'm remembering correctly. It's just, like when you're a kid and you practice different ways of signing your name, or at least I remember that, like I tried it with my left hand and my right hand, which is the version of myself or the logo of myself that I like best or something like that. I think I like the one on the bottom, it's just, this is a work from a series called Half a Man. It's interesting, actually, Byers' first artist book is called Half an Autobiography, or 100,000 Minutes of Attention. Half an autobiography. That was actually what we titled the show, but I don't know what that means, half an autobiography, if that means like only, from age whatever to age 40, or if it just means maybe that half is the only half you can show people or tell people. But this drawing was a fairly large drawing, you got paper of, Mike's head from all these different views. Most of the man is missing below the head. He interestingly went back to drawings he did as a kid in the 90s, and in some cases worked back into them. And there's this very bizarre drawing of a hermaphrodite, which I also think somehow gets at this duality within a single figure, single figure in himself. He's best known in some ways, probably, if people know his work at all. They tend to know these stuffed animal works that he made, this series of works called Arenas. And one of the last works he made with stuffed animals, he never threw anything out. He would always use the residue of one piece to make another piece. And so he did this performance, a kind of fashion show with the clothes of the stuffed animals that he had stripped off them and dressed up and put makeup on and kind of queered himself in some way. But he was attacked in some ways for the stuffed animal works. Well, I don't know about attack, but everyone kind of assumed that he'd been abused as a child. There was something gross and dirty about these stuffed animal pieces. In fact, he was using used stuffed animals that he would collect from thrift stores and places like this. And somehow that made people think of abuse, which he thought was interesting, always insisting he'd never actually been abused. And he incorporated that projection onto him from the public back into his work. This is a piece, I'm sorry I don't have a better image of it, but it's called Abuse Report. So he got a a child abuse report and filled it in, fictionally with a range of things. It's kind of great. Raised by zombies, brainwashed into a cult, left for dead, take me back, please. I think the father's name is Hans Hoffman. Reincarnated, where it says phallic, I forget what category that is. But anyway, it's kind of, he played with these things that people, kind of like Maria Lassny, projected onto him, became things that he then internalized. He, after that, made one of his most important works, a piece called Educational Complex, where he set about constructing as meticulously as he could models of every school that he had attended. And tried to do it from memory, and the idea, trauma theory was popular at that point. He, as well as kind of recovered memory. And so the things he couldn't remember, the parts of the building that he wasn't able to construct, he equated with sites of trauma that he must be repressing or something like this. Again, somehow playing up the abuse narrative. Interestingly, in the very front of that piece, the one thing that's not a school is his house, the little structure at the bottom there. This other sort of institution of formation, trauma, and abuse in some way, which he would return to, this kind of question of school and institutional formation at various other points after that throughout his career, including this kind of masterful body of work that he first showed at Gagosian in New York, where he constructed almost an operatic exploration of high school based on yearbook pictures and scripted little ditties that people acted out. He filmed them, then made works from elements of the sets of those things, edited these videos, and made these combination environments. The whole project known as Day is Done, almost like a kind of high school variety show, talent show. But after that, he seemed to focus for the remaining years of his life, not so much on school, but on home as the operative institutional force, and made a large body of work centered around Candor, Superman's home planet, which he leaves and is destroyed, and he's sort of always trying to get back there. And so Mike made all of these little cast resin versions of the city culled from Superman comic books, and again, buyers like another artist from Detroit puts them almost as these kind of self-portraits inside these hand-blown glass containers, science experiment-like, to these gas canisters of some sort. And this entire body of work then took on a very different, strange kind of meaning after Mike committed suicide, and it confused and collapsed this kind of pseudo-autobiography that he worked with into suddenly like his real life in a way that I found very confusing when I was working on the show, and still confused by. One of his last works was this piece called Mobile Homestead, which was a scale reconstruction of his childhood home, which is now in Detroit, but could get hitched up to a truck and drive around the country and appear in different places. And I don't know, this idea of this kind of dream image from your past life, your early life that's lost to you, being reconstituted and given to the public as a space that they can look at and enter. And what does that mean against this other kind of complicated identity project that at some level was something he was engaged with throughout his career. That Banana Man suit, that performance of this other character, just love this image so much. It was also very much in my mind working on the Lecky show, especially when we kind of got this out of the crate, which is this suit that Mark wore in a performance that he did and actually has done variations of since then, connected to something that he called green screen refrigerator action, which I'll show a slide of, but it's basically, it's against the green screen. It's this thing that normally isolates you, for special effects purposes so that they can film you doing something and then drop you into this other landscape, kind of re-elasting in the snow, which usually buyers in the grass. But in this case, Mark made a suit out of that same color so that in fact he just disappears when he performs in front of the green screen. And I know it's funny that also there were a lot of echoes with Mike Kelly working on the show with Mark. Another one, interestingly, is that he made last year a very strange piece. It was a model of a highway overpass, I guess underpass, which in Liverpool, where he used to hang out as a kid with his mates and had he explained to me a hallucination of a ferry there. And it sort of became this important place for him. He was charged with this magical experience. And so he wanted to kind of reconstruct this object and hold it again in his mind somehow, experience it again in the flesh. And he showed it with these yellow sodium lights that they used to illuminate the freeways in England. So here's a view of someone sort of squatting down to a picture of the underside of the bridge, slightly or significantly abstracted, but nevertheless representative in its scale and faux concreteness. And anyway, so in our show, which occupies 2 floors in the museum, it's actually the biggest solo show we've done since Mike Kelly. The upstairs is very autobiographically centered. And when you walk into it's the largest space we have, you walk in under the bridge. What he asked us to do was to construct, as if it had just been dropped into the room from an oblique angle, a full-scale replica of this concrete overpass and its embankment, which we did. It's all just wood and foam. That then we hired the scene painters from Hamilton to come in and actually make it look like concrete. They're pretty good. And there's a bunch of other objects in that room, but that's the sort of central thing, is you're walking into this full-scale kind of mental projection of this place you've never gone to. You don't even know what it is, but it is this place of significance to the artist. So even as he's kind of interested in not being known, he's also kind of oversharing with us, which I think is interesting. That's Mark. While we were installing, he's trying on this mask from a suit, another costume he had made based on an early modern famous English sculpture called the Rock Drill that Jacob Epstein made, that has appeared at various times in Mark's work. This is Mark in another mask. This is a Felix the Cat mask that he made, and if you sort of look closely, you can see Mark's eye looking through the head. Felix the Cat, at various points, functions as an avatar for Mark. It was the first image. I didn't know this until I first learned of it really from Mark's work. Felix the Cat was the first image on broadcast television, or it was the first television image broadcast. I don't think many people saw it, but in 1928 or 1929, put a little statue of Felix that turned a little turntable, and they scanned it and then sent it out over the airwaves to test it. And this idea, again, the signal somehow animates much of Mark's work, that you're broadcasting something out from yourself. So we installed that in the room with this large inflatable Felix. It's kind of stuffed into the corner uncomfortably. This is a piece that's actually an LED screen. When you get up close to it, it's really like all you see are the lights. But it's an image of, at one point I actually thought it was Mark, but it's an image of Hibiscus, who was one of the members of the Coquettes, lived here. And I think Mark somehow liked the confusion or this alter ego of this character. This person, one of the first people to die of AIDS. And this is Mark, receiving the Turner Prize in 2008. Wearing, I don't know, vintage Versace probably, and bleached hair, cut short, facial hair. This is Mark more recently, pearl drop earring. He's always photographed with his hair pulled back, now much longer hair, not bleached, but always from that side, so the earring is shown. Also in, I think, vintage Versace, sort of Jack Sparrow with a wax mustache and goatee. I think he has the best style of any man in the art world for sure, but he, I think, uses that style, or doesn't use it, it's part of who he is. That style, how he styles himself personally, is also something that gets at, in a different way, that kind of camouflage and hyper performance of James Lee Byers. This is the refrigerator. It's a Samsung smart refrigerator. In other words, one of those objects that's online and supposed to control itself or know things before we do, order groceries when they run out, things like that. Rather remarkably, these smart objects were also among the core of the weapons used to shut down the internet on the day of the opening. Hackers unknown, conscripted, Nest thermostats, online baby monitors, smart refrigerators, all sorts of domestic things that this town has helped produce into zombies that attacked all at once some of the major switching centers of the internet, which I think was kind of great. But Mark's point, I think, in dealing with this refrigerator was that, at a moment where we're somehow in this long, drawn-out anxiety over artificial intelligence, we're nevertheless endowing these objects with a kind of magical life through technology, reminiscent of early magical thinking, investment of inanimate objects with consciousness or thought, power. And so Mark voiced a kind of monologue for this refrigerator as if it had a mind of its own. And at PS1, after we had installed it one night, we, at his request, set up a night vision camera, and he put the green suit on and did this kind of performance, silent performance with the fridge. Of course, in the night vision lens, he actually becomes hyper-visible in a weird way. The bottom floor, or the lower floor, the second floor, is almost all Mark's engagement with things that are universal, sort of the deep time of civilization, the Internet of Things in its pre-internet archaic form, in which symbols, motifs recur in myth and in story. This is a view of the entrance to the main section of that show, which is a version of or derivation of, or repetition of a show that he did in England called The Universal Addressability of Dumb Things, where he was able to borrow a number of objects, ancient artifacts and things from libraries, as well as museums throughout England that he wouldn't otherwise be able to get his hands on because he could ask the museum to do it. And at the end of the show, he didn't like the idea of having to give these things back, so he photographed them and 3D scanned them, and then has subsequently made versions of those objects, printing them out or milling them, out of styrofoam, coating them, making very interesting and convincing facsimiles of these things and presenting them in some cases alongside other, real objects. You see, interestingly, a series of sort of images of human forms that I think are in different ways, also avatars for Mark. This is one of the kind of tableaus in the show. This is everything that he organized under the man subject. So very little of it is Mark's himself. There's this intestinal tract hanging on top of an image of a Henry Moore sculpture. The intestinal tract is actually a Jim Shaw artwork that Mark and Barr had scanned and printed out. On the bottom right, there's a Robert Gober scanned and printed out as a sort of translucent, clear resin with a light inside it. There's an Ed Atkins playing on a TV, a sort of head, digitally animated. There's a book, I think an 8th century book that was badly burned from the British Library. It actually now looks like a brain. There's this sort of rocking cock from Clockwork Orange. There's a sex toy. There's actually a foam core cutout of a reliquary hand that he had borrowed from the Victorian Albert Museum. And in the very front, there are these legs kind of there, and they have ash in them and incense and a little shrine. And that's Mark's art. That's his legs, scanned in the round and 3D printed, about that size, and then just filled with ash. This is another view of that room upstairs that you enter into. One of the things that you're seeing a few things in Mark's art. One of them is this kind of weather balloon, the Sataloon, that a guy named Greg Allen made. I don't know if Greg is exactly an artist. He's kind of an intrepid art historian and has a great blog, greg.org. And these kind of Sataloons were meant to bounce signals that were launched in space. And Mark remembers seeing them on TV as a kid, wanted to have them in the show. And also has worked a lot with electric pylons. Something else that kind of figured in the British industrial infrastructural landscape of his childhood. And actually came across these remarkable sculptures of electric pylons made by a woman named Becky Howland, a New York artist. I guess it's probably in the 60s now. And that's the pylon sculpture you're sort of seeing in the middle of the room there, which was exhibited in 1986 in this room in PS1. We borrowed it from the backyard of Julie Martin and Billy Kluver in New Jersey, where it had been for the last 10 years, which was also kind of this interesting, this artwork that was made mimicking a utility device out in the world that had then gone out into the world and sort of rusted under the elements, then returning to the place where it was first shown. And again, this notion of a signal that you send out somehow, that your artwork is this way of transmitting some, almost like that Maria Lasnik self-portrait of the static television image that is there and sort of transparent and also opaque, and that things get lost in that signal. And on the walls behind this, you're seeing some of these LED screens, one of which has a kind of like a woman's leg with fishnets, makes this sort of moire pattern as her leg moves, which is also kind of child erotic memory that he has. You're seeing electricity, and under that saddle are these legs, differently printed in color. That's the color of pants Mark or when he was scanned, just from the waist down. This 50-year-old man, this young child, just made himself a portrait from the waist down. Sort of virility at stakes, and what you can't see in this picture is there's nothing on the back. In fact, it's literally just the front face of the legs, the crotch and the belly. You go around the back side, it's totally hollow. And that, in some way, I think, is the image that all these other, of this thing I'm talking about, of kind of being there and not being there, and giving some version of yourself, making some version of yourself, for the public that also is not there. Interestingly, half an autobiography from the waist down, or as Mike Kelly would put it, half a man. So, yeah, I guess that's the end. But I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any.
One question.
Yeah.
What drew you to become a curator? What is the agency that draws you in each show?
Oh, well, I became it's always silly to say this, or I feel silly saying it, I became a curator really by accident. I wanted to be an artist. And in high school, I remember reading something that Susan Sontag had said about how she wanted to do everything, and that's why she became a writer. And I thought, right, that's why I want to be an artist, do everything. But then the kind of art that I was interested in making, which is painting, was really the thing that, is one of the more constrained art practices. It's you in a room making stuff by yourself. I got tired of trying to fit the whole world into that experience, and around the time that work that I was doing dried up and I lost my own studio space, someone connected me to Creative Time for a part-time job that I thought they had, which turned out to be a full-time job, and I thought, well, I'll try it, and what do I have to lose? And so I started working there, and I was coordinating, I was producing projects with artists, and which was interesting. It was nice to go to an office and work with other people instead of just working alone. And after a year of not making painting, I just threw everything out and just sort of realized that I felt liberated in some way. I didn't understand this for a long time after that, but I didn't, I struggled with the responsibility that artists have. They're responsible for everything. How big should the painting be? Should it be on a panel? Should it be on, I don't know. It was hard for me to even start sometimes. And the great thing about working with artists was I could think with and through other people's art, which was much better than anything I was going to make. And that was liberating to me. So to some degree, this kind of, these series of masks and sort of avatars that I showed you this evening, that these artists kind of create and work through for themselves, it's a version of who they are for me, if that makes sense. So I'm able to think in the ways that are most exciting to me, because the work isn't mine. I'm sort of behind it somehow. And gradually I realized that was why I really liked it. And that's sort of how, yeah, I backed into it, and then, yeah, I'm still doing it. Yeah.
I'm wondering how much the context of PS1 itself influences how you think about show, just the setting of the building, and then also the galleries that are fixed, certain size and create building that's in sort of way in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think curators, art historians probably can think about art in abstract, but curators, in my view, or shouldn't really ever think about art outside of space. That's kind of what our medium is, making meaning in space and stuff. And when you're working on a show and you sort of, you look at the dimensions of an object or something, how big is that painting? That's just a starting point, because it's never the real size of the thing, which you don't know until you get it there and hang it on the wall and light it. And depending on what color you paint the wall and what you put beside it, it's like you have all these ways of affecting that object and changing its size and power, concentrating it, elongating it. So wherever I'm working, I guess, most of the time at PS1, not always, the space is it has to be one conversation, it is one conversation. It's a space I know pretty well at this point, so I'm at the beginning, when I worked at the Walker, I made my own foam core models of the galleries as a way of imprinting that space somehow in my mind and my body, so I could understand it better. I don't do that so much anymore. I mostly just sketch up when I need to think through something, like a particular room that's hard. But I can only do that because I know what that SketchUp model, that virtual thing, represents in the real world, because I can just walk down the hall and go into that room and kind of feel that. It's liberating not to have to start. At the Walker, we started from scratch. It was a big room, no walls, usually no walls, and you just sort of had to come up with an architecture for your thinking, and that was hard. So I like that PS1 is basically just a series of very different and interesting rooms that you can, and most interestingly, PS1 says hallways. You get to kind of leave and then go back in and leave and go back in, whereas most museums you go in and then you're in. You follow the sequence of things. And then,
I asked if they noticed when I hear that it sort of has that sort of schooling. If there's something about that just changes it.
very, very much changes it. Yeah, I mean, I can't ever imagine a better place from like Kelly showed an old school. So yeah, sometimes it's something we can really work with. But a lot of times when we're thinking about shows, we have this conversation, about is this show better? Like I did the Sturman show at MoMA. Somehow didn't have the friction. Wouldn't have had the friction of PS1. It would have just been kind of punk rock. Whereas like we own the Jasper Johns Target that she made her version, or like to be able to stick her with Duchamp and stick her with these originals in the place where the history from which she had been excluded was written had a different kind of force. So we have that conversation a lot about what's the right place.
I was going to ask exactly that, because I was thinking about a lot of the artists who were working with it are either at the end of their career or pass away, and I've always thought of PS1 as kind of like this younger.
Oh, for young artists, right?
And then at the moment you see like the Kai Alton show, and it's like, what is this doing here? It's kind of amazing, but it totally changes the conversation about what the museum of modern art is supposed to be, and
Right.
just what that conversation is that you guys all have as curators for a place.
Well, first of all, I mean, in the last decade, there's been a kind of swapping. The mainstream institutions having gotten tired of being criticized for not showing enough stuff at the margins, sort of tacked the margins and started doing, you know, at MoMA, like Sanya Avekovich, Sturtevant, you know, artists who previously might have been, you know, at a different institution, whereas, you know, the new museum is tacking them to the middle and doing more of the mainstream kinds of shows. Not that either of us do sort of one or the other, but I think there's been a broader scrambling of those kinds of distinctions in institutional mandates and how those institutions tell those stories. But yeah, I think there are other, I don't know, maybe James and my show would be more powerful than MoMA. I'm not sure, but we did some performances at MoMA, but we did the show. Yeah.
These solo shows, especially like retrospectives.
Can you speak up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. In the solo shows, especially like the retrospectives, do you feel any confliction, or like how do you think about the relationship between the portrayal of the artist's work versus like the portrayal of the artist, especially with these artists where there's, you know, there's so much like self-portraiture, or there's like a lot of autobiographical content in the work, like is being like the aspect of biography like anathema to you, or do you?
No, not at all. I mean, I just think with every artist, you have to try to figure out kind of like, you have to figure out what the internal action of the work is, you know, or how it acts, and then try to figure out how to make that active in the form of an exhibition. Because otherwise you're just kind of showing stuff. And good art is always doing something.
Maybe one or two more questions.
Yeah, right. But yeah, if people are hungry or tired, just leave it for sorry, Kim.
I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the response to these shows, because I don't know if it's like personal cause to sort of make it possible for artists to not have to have a straight biography, but it does seem to make people mad when artists misrepresent themselves. Like there's this,
Right.
which actually is very strange, but there's this strange like unmasking of like Bronte, and everybody's like, oh, she's not who she says she is.
Yeah, sure.
And I mean, if people get upset,
Well,
who is this person really?
yeah, I guess everyone always wants to know. I mean, it's funny, right? Because the age of social media is one of public performance of private something or other. That's assumed to somehow be real or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think we're attracted